Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of The Shay Show, episode 7, and we are going with our semester 6 review. Can't believe I'm about to be that I am now a rising senior, about to be a senior in college. Man, things have went quick. It literally just feels like the other day ago where I was working on the last high school summer, a series that I did where I vlogged my last summer of my high school career. But yeah, it's crazy to think about. But like I said, I'm gonna try to hopefully kind of make this a routine thing of trying to do a podcast episode for every semester, post semester. This one is going to be a little bit different because I'm going to actually include a little bit of personal life and track and things like that. So a little bit different. It's not just going to be strictly school and Christian topics. I might actually, we'll see where this podcast goes. Maybe I'll switch a little bit in topics, but it's going to hopefully mainly be a Christian podcast, but we'll see. But without further ado, let's get into the classes that I took this semester. So I took, I think it was 15 credits. So, like, the first time that I've taken below 6 classes in I don't know how long. But actually, I do know since first semester of college. So, the classes that I took in no particular order was motion design, graphic design and professional practice, Christianity in North America, Theology II, and Mobilizing Congregations for Justice. We're going to go in that order, actually, and just talk about what happened. These first two are going to be relatively pretty quick because there's not too much I want to talk about in terms of art. So yeah, the first class I took was motion design. And that art class was really just learning how to make motion graphics. I know it sounds crazy, but maybe I'll show a little bit of what I did on the screen. But it was mainly a mastering of After Effects. It was one of 2 studios that I took. So yeah, not a lot of things to talk about with motion design. So hopping into the next art class, and my only other art class, it was a studio class. So my second studio, this was my first time really taking 2 art studios together at the same time. So very interesting experience doing different, what it sounds like, graphic design and professional things. So first day of class, our professor announces that the first project is immediately going to be a logo design for an up-and-coming company. So with a real client and potential real-world monetization. So yeah, that was very kind of a, oh, okay kind of thing. I knew the class was going to be pretty rigorous. And like, I don't know if tedious is the right word. I think rigorous is the right word. Was just a lot of stuff to do. A lot of things going on in that. That logo design was probably, honestly, one of my favorite projects I've ever done, and it actually ended up doing pretty well for me. I think that was the project I did the best on. So yeah, and now I'm actually, which is ironic because I'm gonna hopefully try to be making a logo for a friend, but those ideas have not been working out pretty good. So sorry, Steven, you might not get a logo. We'll see. The ideas have not been doing that well, and I've taken a couple weeks post college to kind of reset graphic design and all that stuff mentally. I didn't touch any Adobe software till like the other day, attempting the logo first. So yeah, and then the other 2 projects that we did was branding Beatitudes. So we got a verse from the Beatitudes. I think it was Matthew 5. Never mind. I had Matthew 5:4, which says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." And the goal was to make a brand out of it, kind of like a slogan. So the best example I can give is the "He Gets Us" commercials, like kind of using like that as a brand. So yeah, that was really fun. I got to I think the thing I got from the branding Beatitudes, my catchphrase was, "There is hope after heartbreak," which, for blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. You can kind of hopefully get the connection there. but hopefully kind of an more of a inspirational, like, hey, there is whatever you're going through, whatever you're mourning, or lamenting, or like anything, honestly, there is hope because of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And then the final project being a self-promotional thing where we had to create a mailer, social media post, and a website. So yeah, that was fun. Got to make resume and other things and brand myself. So yeah, really fun. Kind of wish I did a little bit better because I think my stuff is a little trash, but everything can be improved on. Without further ado, let's go into our religion and Christianity not Christianity North America, but Christian ministry side of my major. For those who don't know, I'm a double major in digital media and Christian ministries and leadership. What this is the history of Christianity in North America, what the class kind of sounds like. And so we got to learn about a bunch of different topics and a bunch of different things. So we learned everything from how Christianity was used to support slavery to Mormons and Christian nationalism. And that's actually the main takeaway I have. For one, it is kind of a sad truth, but also it makes sense of why so many people hate Christians, and it's because of the things that Christians have done in the past. Like, Christians have used the Bible so many different ways to justify oppression and other viewpoints that it's just really, really sad to know that people who do this are identified as Christians and then are connected to what Christianity is, which is not the case. And I mean, I've talked about it before. Christianity as a label is not great. I don't like using it anymore because of the negative association it has with it. To say that you're a Christian or to say you're a Christian, people automatically assume 15 different things. But if I mean, if you go, I'm a follower of Jesus, and people, think differently, they know that you kind of care and not just are saying stuff to, I've went on that whole spiel before. I'm not going to do it again. But yeah, it's the sad truth of understanding why so many people like or dislike Christianity, and just the way that it's been used to oppress minorities and other groups of people is just sad. It is just sad, honestly, and it makes us realize that we need to kind of understand our history and not forget our history, but move forward. Not forget, but move forward. Just that whole of like, yes, this is what people have associated Christianity with, and it makes sense because of what happened, and we can't ignore it, because if we ignore it, then we're kind of just like, oh yeah, that doesn't matter, yeah. And it also helps us understand why some other people might be so turned away from Christianity. But the other major thing that I want to talk about that actually gets into the next two classes a little bit, which I'll talk about in a second, is the dangers of Christian nationalism. And I guess, so let me see if I can find the definition that I used for Christian nationalism. So I got this term from Andrew L. Whitehead, and I actually read a book by him called American Idolatry, and I think it's a really, really good read. I actually suggest, I'm tempted to buy the book because I only read it in school. Because it's just a great book and talking about the dangers of Christian nationalism. And he says, white Christian nationalism is a cultural framework that idealizes and advocates for a fusion of a particular expression of Christianity with American civic life. Basically, what that means is people who wrap their identity in Christianity and being an American very closely together. And I mentioned the white Christian nationalism because usually that's the people who believe in this. It's very, 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 very rare to get a Christian nationalist of a different race, mainly also because those white Christian nationalists are so extreme that they think that we need to preserve the white race and things like that. I actually know a friend who has a friend who unironically thinks like that, where it's sad that he believes that, we need to make America a Christian, like, wanting America to be Christian is one thing. saying that they always have been and always should be a Christian nation is another thing, if that makes sense. Basically, it's this difference in idealizing Christianity in with being an American. So they believe that they need to preserve the white race because that's the race that God preserves and things like that. And yeah, so it, as you can tell, it can lead to a bunch of racism and not good things. That kind of leads into what I learned in Theology II and not Christianity North America, Mobilizing Congregations for Justice, because I spent a lot of time learning and talking about different ways that we can fight against justice and what is justice and things like that. So I guess to go into, and also I think, and what I'll wrap up with is my Theology II final paper. So the first thing I want to talk about when talking about Theology II and Mobilizing Congregations for Justice, because those two classes were very intertwined. It was actually taught by the same professor, and yeah, basically a lot of theological stuff that we were learning in Theology II could be applied with mobilizing. So the first thing is really, what does peace mean? And the biblical version of peace. So the biblical word for peace, if you don't know, is shalom. And really taking that definition and understanding what is true shalom. Because as we understand peace today, the most common definition I think people would say is an absence of violence, which is not 100% wrong. It's just a very, very incomplete version that's missing out on so much more. That version of peace, the absence of violence, is unintentionally accepting / justifying acts of violence that still occur today. If we understand peace or shalom to just be this absence of violence, we allow the oppressors to continue to enforce their injustices that may not actually be classified as violence. For example, if parents are unlawfully taken away from their children, traditional definitions of peace would fail to correctly identify that as an injustice because there's no violence happening, but that injustice is being justified by this absence of violence. There's other examples of injustices that can occur that basically the current injustices of our world today can be justified and can be unintentionally or intentionally accepted through that small version and lens of peace. That idea that, as long as they're not fighting, we're good. So then what is the definition of shalom? Jason Porterfield in his book, but also this gets it from the book Shalom by, oh gosh, who is this by? It's by Perry B. Yoder, I think it is. Shalom is this kind of wholeness and everything in the state that God intends it to be. It leaves no aspect of life untouched, and it can never coexist with injustice. Peace, being incapable of coexisting with injustice, is the key for us to understand shalom. Shalom is this whole, it's not just absence of violence. It's the way that God intended things to be. And that includes fighting against injustices, bringing heaven down to earth, things like that. The way that God intended things to be. I hope I'm explaining all this stuff correctly and it makes sense to you guys. If it doesn't, I'm sorry, leave a comment. I'd be happy to discuss this with people. Just leave a comment down below in the YouTube video about what I'm maybe not explaining fully or what you don't understand. Just let me know because this makes sense to me. I spent a whole semester learning about this, so I'm going to be kind of speaking in those terms that I just instantly know, where I have to try to break it down is better for me to truly explain. And this is also, I took a month off of, this is being recorded in May 27th, and my semester ended 3 weeks ago. So, yeah, memory is not the freshest right now. One of the things that I think Matthew 5:9 says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God," right? We are called to be peacemakers. And what does that look like? It is fighting against fighting against injustices, and fighting for God's justice. I guess it is really hard for me to explain this as I'm doing this right now. So I'm going to just kind of go through my Theology II paper, and it will kind of break down things like that. So as you guys know, if you haven't, go watch the pilot episode. I was a victim of gun violence myself. I was in Sandy Hook. So yeah, but I do remember specifically last semester, semester 5. I started out with this thing, and I'm going to mention this. It doesn't have any political affiliation, and it also, I'm not in support or denial of these people. I say that because the first thing I mention is the Charlie Kirk assassination. I can't make a decision on whether I liked him or not because I didn't pay attention to him. So some people loved him that I knew, some people hated him that I knew. So yeah, there's that. But yeah, September 10th, 2025, Charlie Kirk was assassinated, and 2 minutes before Charlie Kirk was assassinated, at a high school in Evergreen, Colorado, there was a school shooting. 2 weeks before that day, on August 27th, 2025, there was a mass shooting at the Church of Annunciation in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It resulted in the death of a 10-year-old and 8-year-old, 20 injuries of 28 others before the gunman killed himself. As a student at Messiah University, I remember post the Minneapolis shooting, there were prayers given for the families and the victims and all these other things. And then 2 weeks later, when Kirk was assassinated and the Evergreen school shooting happened, the same prayers were given again. And I couldn't help but notice nothing had changed. We kind of said these mandatory prayers and then moved on with our lives. Nobody cared. And it frustrated me because nobody cared. And nobody does care until it happens to you. One of my teammates who graduated this year, he lives, or his hometown is York, PA. And there was a hospital hostage shooting situation that happened a couple years ago. And I will never forget what he said because he's like, yeah, can I get prayers for my family and people there? Because our community is just so shook because you never expect anything like this to happen to you. And that's truth. But it's like, are we going to really wait for it to happen to us, for us to start caring? Really? I noticed, especially the Christian community, had no sense of urgency to fight against this. People just seem to sit by, become numb to these senseless acts of violence, and just pray. Say our mandatory prayer and then move on with our lives and not do anything about it. Say, pray, okay, God, you deal with that now. And not do anything about it. And especially in America, we have a deep connection with being an American and like Christians being American. And if you're not a good American, you're not a good Christian. Things like that. The Christian nationalism thing that I was talking about earlier. And usually, this affirms the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, and how Christians will often have a gun-affirming culture, and how that honestly goes directly against what fighting these injustices do, and kind of is a cause of the injustice that is gun violence today, especially gun violence in America. Because, I mean, there's a reason that the stereotype in America is that just everyone shoots each other up. Because, yeah, they kind of do. Because we have so many guns here in America, and we don't care, and we have such pride in our guns. However, I think Jesus himself, when he was coming to teach on earth and his ministry and his example, and I think the example that we should follow as Christians, he displayed nonviolence. He directly opposed violence and went against it, and I'll explain more of that later in what I call or what Jason Porterfield calls the way of the Lamb. So as we talked about before, Christian nationalism, in that same book, American Idolatry, Andrew Whitehead goes into some of the dangers of Christian nationalism. A lot of the dangers with Christian nationalism is creating false idols. One of them being the idol of power, and to hide behind their power and hide behind things like guns. This comfort with violence, that numbness that I explained earlier that Christians get sometimes, is a symptom of that Christian nationalism. People who are comfortable with violence see acts of violence ranging from defending their home with a firearm to war as God's working in the world or God's judgment. that causes that numbness to gun violence and attempts to justify acts of gun violence. But I can't help but imagine that if guns are used by God to judge the world, how is shooting 26 kids and murdering them justice when they've done nothing wrong in their lives? They're just being kids and going to school. In churches, they're praising the Lord. You think God's really telling people, hey, you need to judge them for their sins? No, it's ridiculous. And I don't think that is the God of justice that we worship and talk about in Christianity. I also believe that, and I truly do believe this, a Christian nationalist cannot truly follow the ways of Jesus and America at the same time. They cannot be a Christian nationalist and follow the ways of Jesus together. Those things are directly opposed to each other. The reason for this is what I mentioned earlier, false idols. In Matthew 6:24, Jesus says, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the other one, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And while the verse directly mentions money, the context of this verse is in the Sermon on the Mount, talking about storing our treasures in heaven and not earthly things. So money is an example of an earthly thing. America is earthly. It is not heavenly. It is not heaven. While we're trying to bring heaven down to earth, America is an earth thing. Like I said, one of these false idols that Christian nationalism creates is power. Whitehead defines this power as the ability to do what you want as well as get others to do what you want, despite resistance. Jesus did the ultimate demonstration on why we don't need to rely on power. Jesus used the cross as an example and his display of power. Sacrifice is powerful. Jane Cohn in Andrew Whitehead's book says this quote that I used in my essay: Christ on the cross is a paradoxical religious symbol because it inverts the world's value system with the news that hope comes by way of defeat. Jesus did not come to conquer the world by the traditional ways of power, as the Jews, they were looking for this war general and someone to overthrow the Roman Empire. But Jesus came down instead and used persecution and death on a cross to display power and victory because he rose 3 days later. Now, what is one way that we can display power? It is with weapons. You just think about the power that weapons have. If I'm holding a weapon at you, you are going to probably do whatever I say, or at least be afraid, or, be more inclined to do what I say because of the power that the weapon holds of taking your life. Christian nationalism provides theological justification for violence. For example, the acts of genocide of the Native Americans when America was just getting founded and started are justified with explanations of, it was the will of Christ. God promised us this land, so we must take what is rightfully ours. Jesus in Matthew 22, 47 through 56 rebukes Peter for the use of the sword, a weapon. And in honestly, what seems like a justifiable case. Jesus is getting arrested, and in verse 52, and Peter uses the sword and cuts off one of the ears of the guys who's taking away Jesus, I'm pretty sure. And in verse 52, Jesus says to him, "Put your sword back in its place, for all who draw the sword will die by the sword." Jesus directly disapproving of this violence, even though it seemed righteous or it seemed justified. Because, hey, Peter's defending the Lord and Savior, the Son of God. That sounds pretty justifiable, but Jesus himself says no. So even though Peter thought he was doing a good thing by using his sword, Jesus rebuked him and told him that was not the right thing to do. Plus, if the Apostle Peter thought he was doing a good and justifiable thing by, defending Jesus, the self-proclaimed Son of God, and was wrong, how the heck are we supposed to know as humans, not apostles, not, people with Jesus, what type of violence is justice and when violence is justifiable? We don't. We cannot understand when it is right or just to use violence. That is up to God and God himself. So these mindsets of these violence acts are described by the ways of certain weapons, as I mentioned earlier. Whitehead describes it as the sword, the way of the sword, this way of violence and using violence to display justice is the way of the sword. Jason Porterfield says it's the way of the hammer. Whitehead describes the way of the sword as Christians executing their desires for the world through domination and decree rather than giving and sacrifice. It is both from the story of Peter swinging his sword when Christianity was first intertwined with the power of the state under Constantine and the Roman Empire. Whitehead mentions that Christian nationalists found the way of the sword much more efficient, and it forced those who opposed the church and God's will to obey. The way of the hammer described by Jason Porterfield has to do with Judas, the hammer, who, before Jesus, attempted to lead the Maccabees in a revolt against, I'm going to mess that up, but against people in a traditional battle, the people that were oppressing them, in war general ways, the ways that the Jews thought God was going to save them. But Porterfield mentions that to be a true Christ-like peacemaker, we must not follow the way of the hammer. Jesus was not a weapon or a hammer of God. He waged peace in confrontational, non-violent ways. Porterfield says Jesus intentionally subverted his own people's paradigm for peacemaking. They hoped Jesus would wage peace with a hammer, but Jesus flipped the script. I love the way that Whitehead says it. It says, when Jesus came to make disciples and save humanity, the only blood he shed was his own. The ways of the sword or the hammer, and how I describe what we currently do as Christian nationalists as the way of the gun, take this idea of peace as power. And as a result, they make sure they control the power. The idol of violence is pretty evident in American culture. And you can see the reason for that is because they want to hold on to that power because they control the peace. Yeah, the way of the gun, as I describe it in my paper, is the American culture and the way that American culture idolizes power and violence. Gary Willis is quoted in Dunbar Ortiz's book. I actually don't know where there's a quote that I really enjoy from a book, and it's kind of a satirical comment. I don't know. I can't speak today. But it says, the gun is patriotic. The gun is America. The gun is God. And that's describing the way that Americans think today. Guns are the modern representation of what the sword or the hammer represent in what we were saying before. The United States government, both past and present, has its weapon of choice that holds symbols of power and violence. And it's what many people believe will help carry out God's will. Ellen Marshall, in an article, describes this this idolatry of guns by saying, in our fear, these materials suggest we turn to guns to make us feel safe. Like the anxious people at the base of Mount Sinai pleading with Aaron to make gods to go before them, people turn to weapons and pro-gun legislation to secure themselves. They make an idol of safety and turn to guns to provide it. And any other false idol steers us away from God. We cannot follow false idols and Jesus at the exact same time. It's not possible. Which means we need to be directly opposed to the gun-affirming culture of today. Jesus does not teach us the way of the hammer, the sword, or the gun. Instead, Porterfield describes it in his book, Fight Like Jesus, as the way of the Lamb. The way of the Lamb is what Jesus taught and what he did when it comes to peacemaking. Jesus teaches us to fight, but not for power or for violence, but to fight for shalom, the thing that we were talking about earlier. So what does the way of the Lamb look like? Well, first of all, like I said earlier, we're bringing heaven down to earth. In the Lord's Prayer, we literally read, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. To bring God's kingdom to earth is to bring God's shalom, which God's shalom in justice cannot exist. Fighting for justice is part of shalom. Yoder, in his book Shalom, where the shalom definition comes from that I'm using, says that justice expresses the primary characteristic of God's action in the world and its history. Yoder also mentions that justice becomes the quality that defines what it means for God to be God. A God without the exercise of justice is no God at all. This goes back to power, and we should be directly against the idol of power because we don't need to rely on power, as Jesus showed us. God is the one who has that power, and we can rely on him to use it, not us. And if we really want to follow in the way of the Lamb, we must fight for justice. One of these things, as Porterfield says, is Christ-like peacemakers move towards conflict and requires sacrifice. And no better example of sacrifice than Jesus Christ himself. Porterfield says, Jesus was the Lamb of God, and he calls his followers to embrace the way of a sacrificial lamb. That's where this way of the lamb comes from. Because if y'all remember, in ancient Jewish culture, if you sinned, you had to sacrifice a lamb to take their sins for you. And this also kind of shows why the understanding of peacemaking also clarifies why neutrality during these acts of injustice is ethically insufficient. Because if we do not fight against these acts of justice, we can become complicit in their continuation. And just kind of, we're not helping fight against it. The analogy that we used and actually learned in Christianity in North America is the MLK Jr.'s version of what a white moderate is. And he was talking about how its lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. And because King's argument suggests that neutrality when it comes to injustice is not truly neutral. Rather, it risks enforcing the very systems that are oppressing people today. Because if people don't have an issue with it, then it's nothing wrong, right? Moderates understand what is at stake and what is happening and choose themselves to not step in and to not help make a change. In Christian ways, this can be kind of described in as prayer.
All right, editor Declan here. Sorry if the mic sounds bad, but I just wanted to clarify that I'm not suggesting that prayer is not important. Prayer is very important. I believe in the power of prayer. However, Christians can sometimes use prayer as a neglection to address certain situations. There have been situations outside of justices and things like that. If something's happening in someone's life that they don't want to deal with directly, they just go, all right, God, I'm praying it and leaving it up to you. I don't care. It could be as simple as like, where do I go for my next job? God, just reveal me your next job, but then not go job hunting themselves. And they just expect it to show up in their front door. Things like that. I'm not suggesting, again, that prayer is useless and that prayer, if we pray about things, that it's deflection. But prayer without action is the dangerous bit. We need prayer with action.
Like I said earlier, the school kind of just prayed and then forgot about it. That's that lukewarm acceptance. We acknowledge there is something wrong in this world and we don't do anything about it. We don't care about it. So that's kind of the paper and what I talk about in it. So now it's time to talk about the stuff away from school. I really want to talk about this because there's a lot of good lessons that we can learn from my season. So the first thing that I actually wanted to mention was I got to give my testimony at Track Devos. So I just wanted to shout that out because it was really, really, really a fun time and great. And I'm glad I shared it because of the impact that it had, I hope at least. I was definitely motivated because these past two seasons have not gone, or my freshman and sophomore year have not gone well at all. It was dealing with injury and dealing with trash numbers. I'm a long jumper, and while not the greatest long jumper, I thought I'd be, improving and doing at least close to that. And I was a full foot below of my PR. I was at the time an 18-foot long jumper, and I never hit above 17 feet until this indoor season. So, yeah, that was crazy. But I remember the first track meet that we went to, finally break my 60-meter PR because the 60-meter PR that I had previously was from my freshman year, and I remember being so nervous and literally forgetting to race. I was just like, panicking, things like that. So was motivated that I was like, okay, fast. That was nice. Got a lot of PRs. I broke my I knew it was going to be great when, so for triple jump, we had to take off from a 36 board, and that was literally, if I got in the pit, that was a PR for me. Because this was like kind of progressing on triple things, and I hadn't really done triple in the past until college, really. So yeah, I was very, very happy because triple was first. I got in the pit once and only had to bail out twice of the jumps. And then for long jump, I tied my all-time lifetime PR. And I fouled the first jump and then was kind of like, okay, I'm actually kind of there. And then when I got my legal mark in the second jump, you can hear a bunch of people in the video like cheering and going, yes, because they knew how long and how much struggles that I've been through. And I heard like the tying of the PR, which was just an awesome feeling. It was so motivating, and knowing that, okay, we're back, and to just completely trust God. And going through those first 2 years definitely taught me a lot. It taught me to not really focus on the numbers, and taught me to just enjoy the small W's. Is what I took away from this season and took away from previous seasons. I mean, being grateful for the opportunity to compete. I mean, I'm realistically not supposed to be competing at the D3 level, but I am. And it's a gift from God to be able to compete, and even if I have injuries or stuff like that, just to be on the team. I got PRs, but didn't qualify in long jump, and I really did have expectations for myself to qualify in triple this season, and I didn't do it in indoor. And I actually, to try to help me qualify, for the first time ever, I got a clap going, which, if you don't know, is just kind of like a slow clap into like slow and then gets faster to kind of like get the adrenaline going, getting people involved, and like, yeah. So then I got invited to speak at my youth group again. Shout out Lance. And I got to give a sermon on what would I have liked to known when I was in high school. What would I tell like my old high school self? And I talked about looking vertically and not horizontally, because comparison with track, and it's another lesson that I learned before, is so easy. It's so easy to compare numbers, but that's not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to look towards God and trust in Him, and look towards Him and being able and being thankful for the gifts that He's given us, rather than comparing ourselves. Because comparison only leads to anxiety and all these different things that just don't make you feel good. We go to outdoor season and had a huge PR at York College, York Magic, if you know what that is, in long jump. It was the first ever time, and technically my only time so far, being over 19 feet in long jump. And I remember feeling so great in that. But then it also kind of clicked to me that, holy moly, I'm kind of close to qualifying in long jump as well. Long jump qualifying was 1910, and yes, still big distance, but a lot closer than I actually imagined myself to be. Triple jump was starting to click for me more towards the end of the season, where I started unfortunately getting injured. And unfortunately didn't qualify for either long or triple that season. And I was really disappointed, because I really, really set it out to go qualify this season. And I really, really don't want to not qualify next season. So I'm going to be working my butt off this summer. I actually just restarted my training because I took a month off because the injuries that I've had, which is another, thanking God for the small W's, thanking God that I'm not limping to walk. Had bad shin splints. And then towards the end, really bad hamstring issues, and to the point where I was really scared I was just going to blow out my hamstring. But I also kind of told myself that, like, I'm going to go down trying, and if I blow my hamstring out on a long jump or a triple jump, then I blow my hamstring out. But I'm not going to go down and try to not qualify without trying. So, yeah, got PRs, and got like a lifetime PR at Messiah for the 100-meter dash, which I was completely shocked about, because I kind of just was like, I thought I was just slow. So that was really, really nice to see. And yeah, just huge surprises from God this season with track and in life in general. But the overall learning experience of my track experience, and the W's that I got to take, and the PRs, and the not good performances, and the disappointments, was being able to grow in community and really dig deep into that, but also thanking God for the small W's. Any dub is a dub, is what I told myself, what I told my friends, what I told anybody who had a small, like, yay, bay, nay, like anything good, high, low, whatever. If someone, like, I can think of one of my friends who was a freshman, now going to be a sophomore, only got to compete one time in outdoor and didn't qualify for hurdles, but, he was able to, thank God for being able to compete, because he was injured the rest of outdoor, and he got to compete. Even though he didn't make it, it was sad, yes, disappointing, not what he wanted, all these things. He got to compete, and he didn't end the race injured. So yeah, that was just like using that. So like, even though the last meet at Shippensburg, I didn't qualify for anything. I was really, really bummed, but I thank God for just consistency and just being A, healthy because I didn't blow out my hamstring, and I was actually pretty shocked about that. But also B, just being able to do track and being with PRs, and like even though like my 3 jumps at Shippensburg for long jump were higher than my high school PR, and I never would have thought that would happen. Overall, just a great experience. But now, talking about track, talking about school, hope you guys have enjoyed this episode of The Shay Show. Next episode is going to be with my assistant coach and good friend, because he was a former teammate of mine, Brendan Provan. So yeah, I'm really excited for that episode because he's a great guy. So yeah, I also will most likely for episode 9 maybe have an episode with my new internship that I'm going to be starting in hopefully a week. I'm recording this before I have my official due date or my official start date. So moving back out to PA. So I'm really, really excited to talk about my internship and maybe maybe not start a podcast, maybe do a podcast episode with my boss at the time, my boss for the internship. So yeah, it's going to be a different internship, but going to be still working at a church. So yeah, it's not going to be a youth internship. It's not going to be with Walnut Hill where I grew up. It's going to be somewhere else. So living all by my own for a couple of months is going to be really interesting for me. And yeah, I'm unfortunately becoming an adult. But with that out the way, I just want to thank you guys so much for listening to my Yap session. Thank you so much for watching, listening, whatever you do with the Shay Show. Rate it 5 stars or whatever you do in the description below. Leave a comment on if stuff was confusing to you, and I'll try to get back to you. Yeah. Thank you guys so much. Remember to always thank God for the small W's. And yeah.